Coming from Britain, I can tell you for sure that the movement for Palestine for the past year has been incredibly remarkable. I mean, we've always had a pro-Palestine movement, a very strong pro-Palestine movement, always. Over the course of the past 16, 17 years since the siege on Gaza, we've had numerous protests, some drawing up 400,000, 500,000 people. Every time Gaza has come under attack, we've had hundreds of thousands. So there's always been that movement, but this time seems different. This time seems that there is something that has been injected, a sort of adrenaline shot that has increased not only the numbers, but the fact that a year on, we still have hundreds of thousands coming out in order to protest what's happening in Gaza is something quite remarkable. How would you describe the pro-Palestine movement here in Australia in light of what's happened on the 7th of October 2023? Yeah, you go, and whoever wishes to go.
Yeah, I think similarly, the Free Palestine movement has always responded to the airstrikes on Gaza, particularly. So when the Free Gaza movement was formed, when the siege was imposed in Gaza, and then in 2008, December, the first attack on Gaza, the community came together in large numbers. I think that was quite significant. But then I think it didn't have that much popular support here. And so the Great March of Return, we attempted to have regular protests, but they were very, very few in number. And that,
you mean the people who attended the marches?
Yeah, the
there
people who
numbers.
attended them and the people who carried the organising as well. There wasn't as much interest. So there has been shifts here locally. For example, in 2021, in response to the Unity Intifada, we had very large protests. That was with the Sheikh Jarrah.
Okay. But before we get to that, because you're absolutely right, the Sheikh Jarrah thing that happened in 2022 was quite transformative. But why was it that people didn't respond in numbers to previous events? Is that something that is normal within the Australian mindset in regards with Palestine, or was that because of what reason? Why was it? I mean, was that the normal going of how pro-Palestine?
I think it's all small sections of the left in Melbourne Palestine's always been at the forefront. Not at the forefront, but it has always been known about, and we've always attended and organised before 2023. But I think, yeah, you're right, like it's similar to the UK, just seeing such massive numbers come out. I think, broader than just small sections of the left coming out. And I think it's probably in response to, obviously, the scale of what is happening. But I think also that we're just seeing it every day. It's more accessible to people. People didn't know what was happening in Palestine before 2023, October 7, 2023. A lot of people didn't know, and now it's visible. We can all see it. I'm surprised that there is still so many people showing up a year on, to be honest. I did think it would fizzle out. It's truly like... I don't think Australia has ever seen a movement like this before. I think it's never.
Yeah, I think that the community is starting to wake up.
Yeah.
I think we've kind of just had a type of apathy towards politics and a level of trust in our leaders to be able to do the right thing, to be able to advocate for justice. And I think it was very clear early on that the Australian government was wholeheartedly taking the side of Israel.
Yeah.
And so I think that enraged people in a way that we probably haven't really seen before. And so you end up even, 12 months on, we're still hearing the same rhetoric. Israel has the right to defend itself. And people don't want to hear that. People want to hear that Palestinians are being oppressed, that they need to be liberated that we need to see justice for Palestinians. And we're hearing that, but there's always a but at the end of the sentence, and we're sick of hearing the buts. We want action now. We want the government to stop, paying lip service to Palestinians and start taking action, imposing boycotts, divestments and sanctions. And 12 months we've been calling for the same thing. 12 months it's been falling on deaf ears, and I think community's sick and tired of having representatives claiming to represent us, but really
on an organizational level, what's the narrative? What are you trying to push forward? I mean, what are you asking of your legislators?
So there's differences, I think, and if we go back to what I was saying before, part of that question you asked of why wasn't there, a sustained movement on the streets for Palestine, I think is because the sectors of the Palestine movement that were more liberal had more prominence and more influence, and so they were more interested in doing lobbying with the MPs or raising awareness, holding forums, that sort of thing, but not so much a struggle on the streets. And now, since many of us are at an age and with capacity to organise, there's a different generation that's actually at the forefront of the struggle for Palestine. But not only generationally, I think also intergenerationally, voices that support a more revolutionary approach are able to take up space in a way that has been reinvigorated here on this continent due to moving away from that Cold War repression. So there's been a few years now where the left is able to reorganize. During the Iraq War, in comparison, there were maybe just a few anti-war protests, and they're still considered the largest anti-war protests. However, they did not sustain beyond a few weeks. And I think many of us who are anti-war and who are on the left and on the radical side of politics, we look at that as actually a failure. It didn't prevent the war crimes. It didn't prevent the millions who died at the hands of the war on terror. And so when this began, this genocidal campaign on Gaza, we said we're going to be very assertive and loud that is not going to occur this time round. This time we're going to fight until we win, basically. Yeah. And I think that due to the conditions in society, economically, politically, that's had appeal. So I'm not saying that revolutionary voices haven't been around, but I think this time there's more appeal for that side of politics, and I think that's had a huge influence in the growth of the movement. If it was left up to the more liberal sections of the movement, this movement would have packed up a long time ago.
Yeah, I agree, and about it being the right conditions too, and just that, and going back to what you were saying as well about that just anger and rage at the government inaction and the gaslighting by government and our media, that has really been a motivator for a lot of people because, we have government and media telling us something that we can see with our own eyes is not true. I think that has brought a lot of new people into the movement, just seeing the absolute failure of our governments, the lying of our government, the lying of our media, that I think it's been a shock for even older activists like me. It's been a shock to just see the absolute media gaslighting and media lies, and our government's complete support for a genocide is.
What's the potential for this to cross the boundaries of left into the mainstream?
So I think there's already, within the past year, we've seen a convergence between issues. So that's intentional and deliberate on the part of some of us, which is an intersection with the Indigenous struggle here. Yeah. And that's boosted the movement heavily, and to ground it within Indigenous resistance. So we say, we're fighting the genocide here and in Palestine. We're here to dismantle the Australian settler colony alongside the Zionist settler colony, and to provide an explanation that actually the Australian state stands with Israel. It's not just the Labor government or the Liberal government that stands with Israel, but Australia because of its Western alliance and because of who it sees itself as this like, you know, white colonial power that's part of Western empire. And again, that's why I'm saying these critiques are there, but now they have more of an appeal. So people are actually listening to them and they're adding up to what they're witnessing.
Yeah.
So people are having a consciousness shift. I don't think the goal is to break into the mainstream. I think for those of us who are participating with Unionists for Palestine or trying to grow more of a, you know, revolutionary direction, the appeal is amongst those who are disenfranchised and disadvantaged. So the connection with Indigenous struggle, really important, with working issues, and especially post-COVID, we have here on this continent like a huge homelessness crisis right now, a housing problem, inflation, rent, and cost of living.
That's interesting. So all of a sudden, what you're doing is you're bringing Gaza into the domestic issues.
Yeah.
Yeah,
into
absolutely.
issues that pertain to, you know, normal Australians. All of a sudden, you're telling them that, by the way, these issues
It's all
aren't disconnected.
connected. Yeah,
Is
they're
that
all
correct?
connected.
How about the young people? What I mean, what's been the drive to include them, to involve them in the movement?
I think young people want or have always wanted to be a bit more engaged and a bit more active, and have been able to kind of see past, I guess, the decisions of the past and maybe the apathy of the people that came before us, whether that be our parents, our grandparents. So a lot of young people are coming in with the drive to actually see change and are coming in with, I guess, a bit of more fresher eyes, seeing things a little bit more differently and trying to take action in a different way. So we're seeing a lot more like grassroots actions now than perhaps we did in the past. Before, the Free Palestine movement in Melbourne was probably run by maybe like one or two groups. Now I think we've got more groups than we could probably count. I don't think we could list them all. And that's, you know, council groups, unionist groups, and it's not just one, like Unionists for Palestine. There are like teachers' unions and student unions and all of these things. So the movement has just grown because people are taking action. We've got university encampments that have taken place. The students are really like leading the forefront here on campus.
And do they
and on the
respond
streets
to
as
the
well.
kind of narrative that Tasnim proposed? I mean, the fact that tying in what's happening in Gaza with Australia's own identity crisis. I mean, in all honesty, in an episode that I recorded in Sydney, I asked my guests regarding you know, the fact that Australia itself is a settler colony, and what it's doing is supporting another settler colony. Whilst, you know, there's this recognition of the First Nations and the rights of the, you know, native Aborigines and the like, yet there's very little attention given to the kind of struggle that the Palestinians are trying to fight. So, is this something that young people respond to? Do they understand this? Do they carry this?
Yeah, so I think the whole movement across the spectrum has really been focused on placing the Palestinian movement as a movement for Indigenous rights globally. And everything that we do within the movement, whether that be the students or otherwise, is very much placed on the fact that we recognize that this is a settler colony and that we are working to dismantle both.
Yeah. And I think it's really just Palestine has really laid bare the settler colony that we are, but also just laid bare how, I guess, how evil Western powers are. You know, it really is. It highlights all those other issues. It is.
But when you say something like that, I mean, how do people respond? The Western powers are evil. I mean, come on, that's big.
I mean, you know, currently ignoring ICG rulings. There's war crimes being committed. You know, the Western powers are funding this genocide. I don't think that's a crazy thing to say. I think that is really.
I think you just have to take a step back and look at the decisions that governments are making right now, and the fact that they are standing for a genocide. Our government included, America included, the fact that Netanyahu was literally welcomed and given a standing ovation within Congress. You know, like these things, while a genocide is taking place, that happened. That we're seeing a complete disconnect between the people and, you know, the calls for justice and government.
Yeah, I think that you're right to ask that question about the mainstream, because what has occurred is sort of what the Prime Minister's been complaining about, which he calls, tension or a problem in social cohesion. But what has actually occurred is there is a polarization. So there's people who are in the movement who've now got this consciousness shift and this critique of empire, of like structural and systematic problems in society. And they're realizing, this can't change at the ballot. This can't change in appealing to my Prime Minister or writing a letter to my MP. What I need to do now is to fight on the streets for liberation, and I need a systematic change, and I am going to put my body in front of a weapons factory, and I'm going to picket, and I'm going to get the unions to be part of this fight. So we have that happening. At the same time, you have everyday people walking right past that. So when we go to the weapons factories, you're standing in front of the factory. There's, you're outnumbered by police. There's probably 50 of you and 100 police that the government has decided to send to, crack down on what you're trying to do or move you on or protect that business to patrol the workers in so that you're not cancelling any shifts so they make the profits that they want to make, all of that. And then you have workers in the surrounding factories, or you have people in the neighborhood. They know you're there. They're not, they're not antagonistic, but they're also still not with us.
Yes.
So the conversation is, how do we are in a bubble, and we have been having this conversation, how do we get out of that bubble from being what the government would like, which is a radical minority or a fringe group, and has been trying very heavily to frame us that way, but to actually turn us into a more and more of a fringe. And then what we would like is to build those connections, as we're saying, with the issues that are domestic, so that we have more of a wider participation and wider opposition to the government.
Yeah, like we want to build a mass movement. That is the goal of what we want to do. We don't just want to be a fringe. I don't think we're a fringe group, though. I think there is wide support, but in terms of people, the mainstream participating, we still have a long way to go for that, particularly in unions. What we want to work towards is for unions to put in place work bans and trade embargoes and stop works. And we haven't had a great response from our unions officially on that. We have an amazing rank and file union members that are doing this work, but from from the unions themselves, they're very much tied with the Labor Party here. So it's very difficult to get any action there. But also I think after a year, starting to take a step back and think, well, learning from history, we know that these things take a long time. So with the union action on South African apartheid and during the Vietnam War, it actually took years of radical people on the street to shift the mainstream. So, there's an urgency about it. There's a sense of urgency we want, obviously, because, thousands and thousands of people are being murdered. So there's an urgency that we want people and unions and mass movements to act now. But if we look through history, these things do take time.
Would I be accurate in assessing that you're not hinging any kind of hopes on the coming elections?
Well, me personally, no, because the thing is, and why this movement has actually gained more support than maybe it would have, is because we are acting in opposition under a Labor government, which is actually beneficial for radical politics because it allows people to see the cracks through the two-party system. And so I think what would happen in the coming election, either we will end up with Peter Dutton, who's a fascist, very closely aligned to Trump, or we would have the same government now, which is already supporting and sponsoring the genocide. And so from our end, yes, we might have some progressive MPs who get elected and they will be more vocal and a voice for Gaza within Parliament. But in terms of the overall Australian complicity and support for the genocide, that election is not, this can't be an election issue.
No.
Because that is who's there, right? It's the Labor government. Albanese and Penny Wong have called for a ceasefire, but yet they keep signing new weapons deals with arms manufacturers, but particularly with Israeli defense.
A movement such as the one that Fatima Payman made.
Yeah.
Would that help, you think? Would that progress the kind of discussion that's happening in Parliament or in general politics?
Look, I think if you take into consideration that the Greens have been around for years and they're only just now starting to become a bit more of a forceful voice within Parliament, it's going to take a significant amount of time for. Maybe I'm pessimistic, but I think it will take a significant amount of time for her party to gain traction and have any weight on government policy.
They might get candidates in, just like we probably will get pro-Palestine members elected, but ultimately we have a two-party system, just like the UK, just like the US, and there's
benefit in having pro-Palestine candidates. Obviously, I don't think we're pessimistic about that. Like, we have to keep pushing for pro-Palestine candidates and pro-Palestine voices within Parliament. That is priority for us, I think, and it should be. But at the same time, obviously, at the end of the day, it's the government that sets the tone.
Yeah.
The maximum that a politician who is pro-Palestinian can do in Parliament is ruffle a couple of feathers, keep Palestine in conversation and keep pressing government's buttons, but they can't actually direct the government's policy. And we have to be honest about that.
But do you see the point of those who are heavily invested in the elections, that we need to build political capital from what's happening in Gaza, from the movement on the streets, to take that kind of discussion, that kind of push? I mean, the push that you're making on the streets, but we need something parallel within the corridors of power.
Yeah, I see that is a philosophy and that's the approach. However, for people like myself, that is why we're in this situation where Gaza, had to bear 16 years of siege and now facing a very much real obliteration, because the politics that we have doesn't match the forces that we're against. And so I think we're investing in something else from where a new world can come. And I think unions actually have, if you're going to have like a gamble and think where should you put your money, I think, building union power, you could actually make decisions democratically to stop work. For example, we have a warehouse being built in Avalon, which is one of the outer suburbs, as part of the expansion of the militarization of Australia to basically re-gear the economy from a manufacturing economy to a more militarized economy, because we are in Australia so far away because of the global economic system, all of this. Anyway, so that ended up with Albert System deal of $900 million. And so what we're hoping to do is build rank and file union power to the extent that unionists decide and say, well, we collectively will not work on this project. And that can impact the supply of arms to Israel. So that's also happening in the UK, and it's happening globally. So whether it's picketing at the docks or picketing against the weapons manufacturers, a way to aid Gaza is to limit the military aid and to limit the supply that allows the Zionist regime to commit these acts.
Yeah.
Part of the issue of why Israel is able to not only launch the offensive against Gaza, but also the offensive on Lebanon, is because it has endless supply of arms, which is actually quite unprecedented in history. We're facing one of the most advanced militaries, but also the most sponsored and funded. So yes, I get it, holding on to this kind of liberal hope, but it doesn't. That's why I'm saying it doesn't have that appeal, because how do you put that on the table when you're facing basically the brink of World War III? And it's usually in times like this, like around the Great Depression or similar, that you have more of a revolutionary politics. And I think if we are going to learn from history, we could actually, it's very hard to see it in the present and it's very hard to see what's coming next. But I think these are times where there is potential for that kind of movement within society, where we don't need to necessarily keep clinging onto a politics that can't get us where we need to go.
Monica, in regards with unions, are they as tied, attached to the hip with Labour as they are in Britain?
Yeah, they are. Just about all of the major unions are. There's a couple who aren't, but even the unions who aren't don't want to say anything or
Okay.
So that's been a really big issue for us organising, is that what members want, what rank and file members want, is different to what the unions are prepared to do. We're also really limited in Australia by really draconian industrial laws, which means we can't strike except under specific circumstances. It's going to take in many ways, actually, what you're saying, Tasnim, is right, is that, but the opposite, that it would be much easier to organise in unions if we had a Liberal government in power. Sounds weird, but that's the reality. Like, I think unions would be actually much more willing to take action if there was a Liberal government. They're tied to the hip to the Labor Party, who funds, endorses Israel.
Let's talk a little bit about BDS.
Yeah.
How has that looked in Australia?
I think there's probably...
And by the way, I'm not talking merely about people refraining from buying Pepsi Cola or having a Big Mac or whatever. I'm talking about BDS in terms of, and this is, something we discovered actually. We came across the fact that our universities are investing billions in Israel, that there are places that you never thought, supermarkets that you would usually buy your pint of milk or loaf of bread from every day, that are investing billions again of their profits in Israel. So we're talking about BDS on an institutional, on a big scale.
I think the BDS movement right now has probably been stronger than perhaps in the past. Maybe that's a big statement, but if we look at the university actions on campus, they're literally calling for first disclosure and then divestment. So that's just on campus. We're seeing brands like Salam Cola come up as an alternative to Coke. And so we are seeing a real big, massive shift. We're seeing actions outside of weapons manufacturing companies and all of these things where perhaps in the past the BDS movement, in terms of action, I think the call was there, but the action maybe not so much. So I think it is at the forefront, perhaps more than it was in the past.
And regards with the kind of retribution that protesters, whether they be students or members of staff, employees in various companies, private as well as public, what kind of reaction has there been to that?
So we've seen state forces attempt to stop or crack down on these efforts. Yeah. So particularly we saw that at the picket at the docks in January. That one gained international attention because somehow we managed to have a 4-day, 3-night picket at one of the major ports here
Stopped
in
all
Melbourne.
trade for 4 days.
Yeah, it stopped all trade in the port for 4 days. We camped out there. And then with a police operation of over maybe 300 police officers of all various divisions, they came down on about 20 people only. Right. But at that time, we had called a mass rally. And so as the police operation began, 300 people kind of descended on the port. And then there was a clash there. That was quite important for the movement in all of us realizing, okay, well, how do we achieve boycott, divestment, sanctions? Because that was against Zim Shipping, which is, the Israeli shipping company, and the trade unions in Palestine put it as one of the major targets to stop the flow of, to stop the supply of arms, but also stop the flow of trade to the Zionist regime. So that one was a major one. Then there's been a more understanding of Australian weapons parts and the way that they're being manufactured in suburbs where many of the multicultural communities live. And so then we've started having anti-weapons pickets at those factories to bring awareness, but also to try to cancel shifts. That's part of the F-35 fighter jets. Yeah. So that's kind of what we've learned.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But these pickets are happening by community members and not by workers. So we need to shift to get workers to
what
picket
kind of support can? I mean, something that happened, as you are well aware, in the United States as well as in Britain, that students who were protesting, members of staff who were standing with the students, they came into being dismissed, to being fired, to being prosecuted, to be, vilified in the press, and their lives turned upside down. On a large scale, I would say, I wouldn't say 100%, but on a large scale, there's been support, both legal as well as financial and reputational on behalf of the movement. Over here, how have things been? Would someone sacked from their job because they took part in pickets?
Yes, they have. We have that, and I've that is a core part of the work I'm doing. So my union is the Australian Services Union, so that's sort of a core part of the work we've been doing as members in there, because we've got many members who have been sacked for their pro-Palestine activism, have been victimised at work, have faced disciplinary action, have been told they can't wear a badge or a keffiyeh or put up a poster. That's fairly minor stuff. I know that in University of Sydney, I think, has had some really significant experiences of repression and as well as the stuff that's happening in the cultural and arts sector as well. So we had the Australian pianist who was wasn't sacked but had his show cancelled. We've had writers and artists have their show cancelled. So that is happening here. And just today, actually, an article came out about healthcare workers and nurses who were being targeted by Zionists. They were having complaints sent to their workplaces and also sent to the health board to try to get them sacked. So there's a really big Zionist lobby. And actually in the work that I'm doing within my union group, often complaints about staff in community and social organisations are coming from Zionists. So they're complaining to people's workplaces about particular people, and then the workplace is like overreacting to that complaint and enacting disciplinary measures on staff.
How has this worked or panned out in terms of the, just to put it bluntly, the Muslim community in Australia? How has your approach, how has your narrative, how has your appeals? And I don't think that there is any question in regards with the affinity or the support, the empathy and compassion of the community. I don't think that's in question. Correct me if I'm wrong, but in terms of supporting your actions, how has that been?
I think there's been a split. So there's people who've stayed home, and there's people who've been at the forefront.
Right.
So we've seen, as Sarah was saying, the emergence of these small grassroots groups in local areas where there's high Muslim demographic and multicultural demographic. Many of them are led by Muslims, but it's not around Muslim organizing. So it's very diverse and around the Palestine issue. But I would say that is Muslim politics. It's still, an assertion of how to be political as a Muslim, not necessarily organized in the kind of traditional way. But the traditional places of political power, unfortunately, have not really been at the forefront of the struggle here. So Islamic Council of Victoria supports the rallies, but you don't see masses of Muslims come when the Islamic Council of Victoria
in response to the ICV,
come. Yeah, so it's not in that way. I mean, the major rallies, like at the beginning and then just this 1 year mark, we did see many people come. But I think that's fine. Like those who want to...
It's the normal way of things.
We're changing the political direction.
Yeah.
And it's slowly people will be dragged and they need to choose a position, and that's how it is at the start. There is friction, there's growth pain, but ultimately this is what it is. Like the generation that now is moving the struggle forward is saying, well, 20 years of the war on terror, invasion of Afghanistan, invasion of Iraq, and the decimation of Syria over 10 years. Now what? And of course, the repression in Egypt. Yeah. So this generation is saying, well, we're not going to shift away, because that is an option. We can just look away, right? We can. There's thousands of political prisoners in Syria and in Egypt. Many who've been hung, many who, are missing. That is the case under which our politics, those are the conditions that our politics allows. Yeah. So now we have people who are saying, well, if not everyone's going to join, that's okay, but at least we're going to move forward to find something different that can confront the political problems. And just on that, I would say that that's an international sort of approach. Like you see that happening internationally. And I think that's where the possibility is. If that was only happening here in Naarm, then of course it won't have much effect. But if you look at groups, in New York, in London, even in Malaysia, even in Syria, you see generationally people were saying, okay, now we're going to do something different. And I think that's where there is some potential within that.
Yeah. But with regard to the Muslim community specifically, I think we have people that are a bit more confident in coming out and protesting and taking action in organising. But then you also have the maybe younger sections of our community who are newly migrant communities who are not necessarily as confident as the rest of us to take a bit more of an active and stand that is a bit more at the forefront. And that can be for a range of reasons, which includes skepticism that we carry from back home, distrust in police, distrust in, the safety of protests, in the ability for us to be able to protest safely. I mean, obviously, sometimes the treatment of police here don't help with that. But it is something that a lot of people kind of also they come back with the skepticism of are protests actually achieving anything. And so you kind of see people still advocating for Palestine, but not necessarily coming out to the Sunday rallies. So just because we don't see the Muslim community at the forefront at protests or at the pickets doesn't mean that they're not organising within their own spaces. We have the organisation Muslim Votes Matter, which came out this year specifically to target elections and making sure that the Muslim community is a little bit more aware of the power of their vote, how to vote. So we're seeing, things like that come up, Muslims for Palestine, Australian Muslims for Palestine. We're seeing these kind of grassroots initiatives take place, take form. So, like I said before, just because people aren't at the forefront at the protest doesn't mean that Muslims aren't still organising. Palestine will always be, at the forefront for us.
I mean, obviously, there's a sizable Muslim community of Lebanese heritage.
Yeah.
And now Lebanon is absolutely at a state of war. I mean, not that it's fighting back, it's receiving, the missiles and rockets of Israel every single day. So Lebanon is now, as Netanyahu said and threatened, it's going to be the new Gaza, and we're going to do to Lebanon exactly like we did to Gaza. It's as though it's a badge of honor that he wears, the lives of so many thousands of people. But anyway, one would expect that would draw a reaction, not only on behalf of the community, and you, Sarah, are from Lebanese descent, I understand, a reaction from the community, but also from the Australian government. I mean, surely a sense that tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of its own citizens, where their families and their towns and their cities are being destructed and destroyed. Surely that there should have been some sort of. I'm not assuming. I don't know what's happened.
I think there has been a slight shift. Slight.
How so? Tell me.
Maybe I think that there has been a slight. I think just in the media reporting since the invasion of Lebanon happened a week ago, 2 weeks ago, whenever it was. I think that there has been a shift in media reporting. There's been more coverage. That's just my perspective, though. I'm not.
So there's been more coverage, but I would say it's vilifying. So what happened in the past 2 weeks is that, yes, there's been more people who've hit the streets. The issue's gained prominence. I mean, the past few months has just been, the deathliness of Gaza, but not so much at the forefront of the news. Now it's returned with the invasion of Lebanon and then the assassination of Nasrallah.
Yeah.
And what happened was the day after Nasrallah was assassinated was our regular weekly protest. So we hold weekly protests 12 p.m. every Sunday. And that's been, something that we've established as a space for the movement. So the morning after, people woke up to the news and they came to the protest, and the Lebanese community that you speak of, sections of them decided to join with the Hezbollah flag and photos of Nasrallah. And then this turned into a moral panic within all of Australian society. So we had politician after politician condemn the raising of hate symbols, terrorist symbols, and then referring to the Australian Federal Police to investigate it, because now, since last year, we have hate laws that ban the raising of the Nazi symbols, but then also terrorist symbols. And then the AFP said, actually, we didn't have the state police, so Victorian and New South Wales police didn't have the jurisdiction to arrest people in the context of a protest. So now we're going to do under investigation. Then politicians came out and then they started saying, oh, well, this is very weak. The Labor government is weak. Why aren't they arrested? Arrest them now. Where is the law and order? So it turned, again, like the Palestine issues become very much embedded in domestic politics. So very much crime and punishment, all these themes that are domestic are, regurgitated through the movement. And then the government responded with more condemnation, and the AFP released photos of 7 people who were at our protest with the Hezbollah flag. Then I was invited on TV to kind of, as a protest organizer, and I was interviewed about it, and they asked me, were you surprised that there was, a Hezbollah flag at your protest? And I told them I wasn't surprised, because the night before Nasrallah was assassinated and Hezbollah has popular support. It is now in battle with Israel, and that is what happens when war is declared and somebody is assassinated in 6 residential buildings over his head in a massacre. Hezbollah is part of the Lebanese government, and I can have my views on it and you can have your views, but it's not surprising that there would be people in Australia who want to express some kind of, opinion about that. So now is different. And as you said, the Lebanese community has thousands within the diaspora here in Australia, and the government is trying to work out what is their strategy.
Yeah.
I think the attitude towards Israel hasn't changed, and I don't think it will change. At the end of the day, the government...
Who are we talking about here? The community or the government?
The government needs to continue to back up what it's been saying for the last 12 months.
Right.
If they start to change what they're saying because Lebanon's been bombed, then essentially they'll be admitting that for the last 12 months they were not standing on the right side of this. So
they need to be consistent all of a sudden.
But basically what we're seeing is they're scared, I think, of the Lebanese community to a degree. Yes, they're tiptoeing around what they're saying and being very mindful of what they're saying. But if we listen closely, it's not very different to what they've been saying about Palestine for the last 12 months.
Yeah.
Okay, let's spend just a few minutes talking about what we think will happen in the future. Now, I'm not asking anyone to look into a crystal ball. I'm not asking anyone to sort of give their wish list. In light of what you see, in light of what you've all clearly been through for the past year, over a year, how do you think? I mean, obviously we have the issue of elections. We have the movement on the streets. Do you see this becoming a feature of Australian life? Do you see this? Or will it come to an end quite quickly? Will it wane and wither and become something that just a few people, causing a nuisance, occupying the time and efforts of the police? What do you think? I mean, how are you optimistic?
If you had asked that question maybe 12 or so months ago, I think we probably would have had a little bit more skepticism because the movement hasn't been sustained like this before.
Right.
It's been 12 months consistently, whether people are coming to the streets on a Sunday or organising within their local communities at pickets, weapons manufacturing companies, universities, you name it. People are taking action for Palestine. I think the situation seems to be getting worse over there. And obviously we have genuine concern about that and what, the next couple of months are going to look like. But I think so long as things continue down this path, community is going to continue to show up and take action.
You're hopeful.
We have to.
That's.
I don't even think it's a choice of being hopeful. I think we know that we have no choice. If we back down, like if this is what's been happening for the last 12 months and we've been awake and active for the last 12 months, what horror would be taking place if we were not alert and awake and taking action? And I think we know that. And so we have absolutely no choice but continue to show up and take action until
I
we
agree.
see.
And I don't think the movement's going anywhere. I can't see it stopping. I think it'll keep going. We'll keep doing what we're doing. I think different elements of it sort of shifts and change, and different parts of it become more important at one point. I mean, the council elections are, quite big at the moment. I think leading up to the federal election, I think even though we personally don't see any change coming through electoral politics, I do think it will be a big part of the next federal election for especially in local seats, in local areas. I think we're going to keep going.
Yeah.
What do you think, Tasnim?
Yeah, I think I think it could go either way. So it could dwindle, as you've said. People can pack up. But these are strategy questions and they're leadership questions. So from my end, I think what we've been doing in the past 12 months, the right thing from that is to build political leadership that's willing to struggle, building mass opposition by connecting with environmental, class issues, gender issues, Indigenous justice. That gives force to the movement. that is also scary, because if we do get that mass opposition, then what happens? And if that's on a global scale as well, then, you know, the United States, within Australia, within the UK, that's a challenge to empire. So we know that the forces of the state are going to see you as enemy number one, and that's how the government's trying to now frame us. With this demonization, that risks the movement, so the movement can decide to go home. But if we continue, it's the decisions we make, whether we're able to get popular support or not. And I think now is the time for us to think about how do we get that popular support, and how do we break through to people in Australia who can be sympathetic, but then they can decide to join. So not only stand and say, I support you, but actually join in the movement. Hopefully, you know, with more planning and like more directness, we can get to that. And for me, you know, having family in Gaza, many of our families been martyred in Gaza. I think, you know, the sense of failure is huge, but we can translate that into, you know, transforming our politics internationally, because what we're seeing is, and I think what we're all realizing is that in real time, we were not going to be prepared enough to prevent the annihilation of Gaza. And I think we see that. Many of us are maybe not willing to admit that out loud, but that is what is Gaza right now. There's no hospitals, there's no schools, there's no universities, and even northern Gaza, as a destroyed town, is being, you know, ethnically cleansed and population transfer as we're speaking. So whatever we've got left, whatever fight we can win, I don't know what would be the status of Gaza at that point. So I think all of us, as Sarah said, we have that sense of it's you know, live or die. It's fight
or flight
or lose. Yeah. Fight or flood. And we'll see what kind of politics comes from that realization.
Guys, thank you so much.